What is going on? I want to welcome you from Half Court for today. I am Sean Murphy, joined as always by my guy, Marquette's movement shooter, Troy Sergey. But also today, I'm joined by one of my favorite guests to have on this show, one of the best basketball minds on Pistons Twitter. I'd say he's the chief historian of Pistons Twitter. It is my good friend Keith Black Trudeau. Keith, long time no see, long time no pod, my friend. It is great to see you. How have you been doing? Welcome back to the show, and thank you so much for taking the time.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm fantastic. I'm very excited, a little bit apprehensive, but very excited about watching some Pistons playoff basketball for the first time in this decade,
Mhm.
very very much hoping to see a win. It's kind of stuck in my craw. The last time I had season tickets to the Pistons was the last time I lived in Michigan, which was 2008, and that was I already knew I was moving away,
Mhm.
but yeah, that was kind of like my farewell thing. Was like, let's get season tickets to this, and it turned out to be like the farewell season for the Pistons too, because they haven't come back since. But yeah, I was at that game, that last playoff game they won. I was at all the conference finals games against the Celtics. So
Yeah.
I was there in game 4, and then I was there again in game 6 when it looked like we were going to push it to 7, and then the bottom dropped out in the fourth quarter, and little did I know that the bottom dropped out in the franchise for 16
Yeah.
goals. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we were pretty spoiled back in that time, Keith. It was
Yeah.
it was not just a, a thing that we would hope to get to the conference finals for the 2000s. It was an expectation. I mean, they had, you
Yep.
know, they had a historic run of consecutive conference finals appearances and multiple finals appearances. Only got the one championship, but they were a incredible game-winning 3 in the 2005 finals away from potentially getting another championship. But that's not what we're here to talk about today, because I don't want to get too sad. Today's a happier conversation. As you mentioned, Keith, the first time in this decade the Pistons are playing playoff basketball, and I'm really glad you brought up the other point as well of just the importance of this team getting a win, because obviously, this team has had a lot of turnaround and has done a lot of things, that in a historical context, is one of the greatest single season turnarounds ever. The only team in an 82 game season to triple their win total. The Hornets did it during one of the lockout years, but I mean that
It was,
doesn't really count
yeah.
when they were already missing so many games. But Keith, just for the people that might not understand, how important is it for this team to get a win in this postseason and to shake that boogeyman, so to speak? And what kind of, beyond that, what is your expectations going into this type of playoff run?
So this is the kind of thing where it's really unfair to this current team because
Yes.
outside of Tobias, weirdly enough, Tobias Harris is part of this 14 game playoff losing streak, this record losing streak that they're on. But again, putting it into context, uh, those last 2 games of the conference finals against the Celtics, but uh, the three times that they've made it the playoffs since then, they were the sacrificial 8 seed up against a number 1 seed, and they got swept 3 times in a row.
Mm-hmm.
And this team has already accomplished so much, going from 14 wins to 44, which nobody thought that they were going to do. So I feel like expecting them to win a playoff game, and I've already gone on record saying, look, if they get swept, it's still a very successful season.
For sure.
I mean, I don't want to hold this team accountable to these 4 playoff games that no one thought they were good enough to participate in to begin with. Do I think it would mean a lot for this team going forward, for their psyche to at least win one playoff game, to have something to hold on to? Yes, and you know what? They're not an 8 seed this time. They're a 6 seed, and they're a 6 seed going up against a 3 seed that they've had identical records over the last 2/3 of the season. They've been basically the same tier outside of those first 2 months where the Knicks were really good, the Pistons were really bad. And on top of that, the Pistons have beaten the Knicks 3 out of 4 times. You can take stock in the last game if you want to. I know the Knicks were missing people, but bottom line is they have the confidence that they can compete with them. So again, if I don't want to lead people wrong. If the Knicks somehow win the series 4-zip, it is not going to crush me, and I don't think we need to overreact to it. There are bigger and better things for this current Pistons team beyond this season. Even if they don't add anyone significantly, they're going to progress to be a much better team than this. But yeah, I'm really hoping they get at least one, and they could very well win the series. I'm just trying to measure my expectations.
Yeah, I think it would just be a big thing for the franchise and just for the organization as a whole, just to kind of shake that off their back. It's not, like you said, it's not fair to those young players because this is their first chance at the dance, so to speak. But that is something that has really weighed not only on the organization but this ownership group, because this would also be the first playoff win that this ownership group would accomplish, which is something that I think would mean a lot to them. And Keith, remind me, was Obama still campaigning when the Pistons last won their playoff game? Because
we hadn't had our 2000. So yeah, George George W. Bush was still president.
Right.
Wow.
That would have been in May. That would have been in May in 2008.
Yeah.
Election was
There's so many things have transpired since the summer of 2008.
That was the pre-08 housing crisis.
Yeah, because that was November as well.
It was like, what were the video game systems back? Like, were we still on like the PS3 and then like Nintendo Wii era?
That was like right when like the PS3 and the 360
like the original. The Xbox 360 was a bit
Guys, I don't even think PS3 was as popular. I think PS3 just came out.
That was when it was still $600, which even at that time is just insane.
We really wasn't, I don't think, on the market yet. Maybe it was, but
I think it was just starting to hit the market. I think we were just.
I think Nintendo was still asking to Wii or not to Wii. That is the question.
Yeah,
that was a terrible joke. I apologize. We could move on from that as soon as possible. But Troy, what is your expectations going into these playoffs now that we officially know that it's going to be Knicks versus Pistons? It's kind of felt like this has been. It's felt like if in the wrestling fan analogy, it's like we've been building to this going into the big pay-per-view, and now we're finally here.
Yeah. Well, I think the most important thing is what Keith already mentioned, is that we're not the sacrificial 8th seed lamb, right? Going against the big dog, like if it was even, the Cavs or the Celtics, we're going against the Knicks, who we've talked about some of their weaknesses on this podcast all season, Sean. And I think, man, I want to win a game, Sean. I do remember game 4 against the Celtics. I was watching casually as a fan, but where I became all in was the year after, where we got swept by the Cavs. We didn't even have Iverson playing that series. So I really want to see them win a game. And I'm with Keith too. I think this series is winnable. But I think we certainly have to have, as far as expectations, to understand that we are the underdog, to understand New York is the favorite, to understand that they do have guys on their team with playoff experience. And that we at the end of the day, we do too, but we are a primarily younger team. And this, looking at our young guys like Cade Cunningham and Jalen Duren, this is their introduction to the playoffs. So I'm with Keith. I'm not going to be heartbroken. I'm not going to be, saying things I don't believe if they get swept, but I don't think they are going to get swept. I think we're going to see a 1 or 2 game victory and hopefully 3 or 4 to win the series.
Yeah. I think if I can add something,
of course,
people need to remember that prior to the season, like this Knicks team was assembled. This is an all-in Knicks team. This team was assembled to compete in the East and try to get to the finals.
Yes.
That is how this roster was constructed. This Pistons roster was simply a roster that was constructed to try to develop the young talent that they have. So the expectations that are weighing on both of these teams are very, very different. I think how the first 2 games in Madison Square Garden go could define the entire series, because
absolutely,
if this Knicks team, there's so much pressure on them, to make the finals, and they kind of sputtered towards the end of the season. If they come out and the Pistons punch them in the mouth in games 1 or 2, and they make it look like they're on the same level as the Knicks, I think that might take kind of the spirit out of the Knicks, because they're looking for the pressure's on them to win a championship. They're struggling with a 6 seed. That might cause them to splinter. Same thing with the Pistons. If the Pistons come out and the Knicks come out focused and they make it look like they're a tier above the Pistons and they win games 1 and 2 in blowouts, I think it could turn the other way too. I think both of these teams are very fragile, kind of from their standpoint, because neither of them have a lot of experience, winning playoff series. So I think the very first 2 games will probably determine who wins it.
Yeah, and in particular, that first game, a lot of times, especially for the lower seed, tends to be really crucial. And so, I think it's going to be interesting to see, just how Detroit is able to play their game in a playoff series. Specifically, we know how much this group, their offense is predicated on getting out in the fast break and using their defense to create some of their best offensive opportunities. Whenever this team is at their best is when they're running in the open court. But we know historically that the game really slows down as the playoffs come around. But also we know that teams have more time to prepare for individual matchups and are going to try to eliminate this, from the Pistons game. We've seen, I remember like Ty Lue, when the Pistons were in LA, had a really good game plan and limited the Pistons fast break opportunities. Anytime we've seen Detroit have to really rely on their half court offense and Kate's not having a good game, that is when it hits the shan, for lack of better terms. So for me, Keith, I look at how are they going to be able to, create those opportunities to run in the open court, and who's going to be able to get their offense outside of a Cade Cunningham, because we think he's been blitzed before. He's about to get blitzed to, I think, a level that we perhaps haven't seen, before for a Cade Cunningham, and it's going to be a lot more focused in. And even though the Knicks haven't been the Knicks that we knew defensively during the season, I would wager that now that it's postseason, it will start to ramp up at least a little bit.
Yeah, I think, kind of the X factors in the series are, Isaiah Stewart and Asar Thompson, because I think the Pistons do have a couple of interesting defensive Swiss Army knives that not a lot of teams have. And that is kind of going to be JB's task, to see how to deploy that and to try to disrupt New York's offense. Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of Asar Thompson guarding Jalen Brunson. I don't think that's a question. But, aside from that, I think we're going to see more Ron Holland, I think, than people expect, because he's also good at forcing turnovers. And Isaiah Stewart, on top of all that, his health, if he comes back healthy enough, because the one archetype the Pistons have struggled with all season is a stretch 5. Name the stretch 5. They've all lit the Pistons up this year because they play a lot of drop and their big men don't close out very well. Isaiah Stewart's your one exception. I think you're going to see a lot of him mirroring Karl Anthony Towns. Even though he comes off the bench, I think you're going to see a lot of him in the important minutes mirroring Karl Anthony Towns' minutes. And that's going to be a huge factor, because if Towns is able to get loose and get comfortable, I don't see any way the Pistons win the series, because that's a guy that could drop 50 on you if you take him lightly.
Yeah. Talk about a mental battle. That will be intriguing to watch. Yeah. Isaiah Stewart and Karl Anthony Towns going at each other. I mean, there is a above 50% chance of those guys having some form of unique interaction at some point during this series. I think another reason why this matchup, was a lot more beneficial than, say, like a Pacers matchup is, even though I think this is going to be a physical series, and I think we are going to see, these teams go at it, and, there is probably going to be some emotions and some things that flare up, because that's what's happened with this Pistons team all season long. Now you throw them into their highest pressure basketball ever, it's not going to go down, right? But if they went against a Pacers who they've had, have a legitimate beef with, where we've seen some things kind of already stew, like, that's a series where it's like, okay, well, can we even get through that series without like a third of our team being suspended by the end of it, right? Like, so whereas with this one, it's still going to be high intensity, and I think you're going to have a team that's, going to, for the most part, be up to the challenge. But I think another reason why this matchup, not to say again, because like the Knicks are the favorite in this series, but I think why the Pistons like this matchup is their physicality and the way they like to play basketball is exactly what the Knicks like to avoid. And, kind of goes right at their weaknesses as well. Like that stretch five, offense that they run. I mean, Troy, we've been talking all season. It has come at the cost of their interior defense. And I don't think Mitchell Robinson and Cat have even played 30 minutes together since Robinson's comes back. So I don't even think that's something they can really rely on in this series, let alone this postseason.
Right. No, I just think, we've seen the Pistons team take leaps on both ends of the court, but the offensive end, Sean, I mean, we're able to score the basketball. And I think when you look at the Knicks team and kind of how, they have looked at times a little bit lackadaisical on perimeter and sometimes interior defense, I just think we have some weapons. We have some weapons where I think if the Pistons are to win 1 or 2 games, maybe even 3 to stretch it to a game 7, I think it's because they're able to expose some of those weaknesses on the New York Knicks end. And when the Pistons went on some winning streaks this year, they were making teams look silly on the defensive end, right? I mean, they were just getting to their spots. They were scoring the basketball. And I see that there being possibilities to do this again against the Knicks team. There's a reason we won 3 games against them too.
Yeah. And especially like you brought up Isaiah Stewart and mirroring Cat's minutes, but I think also if this team's going to make a good run, Keith, I think Jalen Duren on the offensive end, in particular, attacking the interior and being the immovable force that we've seen. Like the beginning of the season, he admitted to himself he came out soft. Ever since January 1st, though, he's been almost an entirely different player. If you go and look at the stat sheet and the things that he's done, obviously defensively, he's just gonna have to stay the heck out of foul trouble, and stay engaged and not get beat too much on those stretch, 5, opportunities. But let's be honest, we know it's going to be a struggle. But can he mitigate that or at least neutralize that by his impact on the offensive end? With his ability to get to the rim and even with his playmaking.
And that's going to be like the game of cat and mouse, because on one hand you have
cat and mouse. Sorry. Anyway,
not that one. All right. So
I'm a fun guy. I'm sorry.
On one side you have Jalen Duren, who I believe set the team record for field goal percentage in the season. I think it was 10th or 11th all time. And it was mostly dunks, but he still finished through contact around the rim pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
On one hand, you have Duren and Stewart. On the other side, you have Cat and you have Mitchell Robinson. And Mitchell Robinson is still, one of the elite rim protectors in the NBA. Excellent defensive center.
Yep.
Not much of an offensive threat outside of catching lobs. So I think both coaches are going to have to figure out, can we exist on the floor with our offensive centers, or if it doesn't work out, are we going to wind up playing our backup centers more, which are more defensive, both elite rim protecting defensive centers? So I think that to me, that's kind of fascinating.
Yep.
Yeah. Cause look, Cat can't guard Duren, but I haven't seen any evidence that Duren can guard Cat either. So yeah, it's almost going to come down to scheme for me, at least, unless one of them just simply turns it up a notch in the playoffs and simply plays better defense than we've seen them capable of. It's going to come down to coaching, as weird as that sounds, at least to me, just finding some way to help them both defensively so you can keep them on the floor.
Yeah, for sure. And as much flack as I think, like a Tom Thibodeau might be catching from, the lure of Knicks fans and, just from the NBA at large, just over the fact that this team didn't really improve win-wise very much. I wouldn't necessarily put that on the coaching staff as much as I'd maybe look at the front office and maybe being a little short-sighted in some of their decision-making. That's a whole other conversation. But, I mean, Troy, I think one thing we do know, Tom Thibodeau can coach. And he's a smart guy. And even though he rides his starters to the very bitter end, down to their last bones they have available in their body, he can scheme and he can coach and he can exploit and make adjustments on the fly.
Yeah, absolutely he can. And I guess I fell in love with his coaching ability back in the days of the Derrick Rose Chicago era, right? And just how he was able to get that team, playing elite basketball, number 1 seeded in the regular season. So, he has experience in these moments, right? He knows how to coach in these moments. He knows how to lock down other teams' best players, in moments like this, into the playoffs, into the deep runs of April and May. And they definitely have a different roster than last year. Of course, losing in Game 7 in the semifinals to the Pacers. But I know they're the Sixers, but they were able to exploit a lot of the Sixers' weaknesses in that first round last year. And I think a lot of that had to do with coaching as well. I think talent-wise on the Sixers, we don't want to talk about the Sixers, but I just think I was impressed by his coaching last year and how the Knicks were able to really expose the Sixers on all ends of the court. And I would hate to be on the receiving end of some of that this year, but Tibbs can coach.
Yeah, sure. and really, if you remember how they played the Pacers in the second, like they were dominating the Pacers in that second round series, and they just kept suffering injury after injury, and that's what allowed Indiana to come back and win that in 7. Like a few things break differently. We could have had the Knicks, playing the Celtics in the conference finals, and maybe they wouldn't have made all these drastic changes to try to upgrade their offense. None of that was Tibbs' fault. Like it wasn't Tibbs' fault that they lost to Indiana. They just ran out of players.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And one thing that's undeniable about this team is regardless of the coaching staff, regardless of the front office, even though this is a 50-win basketball team, that's something you can't take away from them. I think it's one of the 50-win basketball teams that people have the hardest time giving their credit just because of the fact that they do have that glaring record against the top 3 teams in the league, being 0-10 against the elite of the elite in the NBA. And I know that doesn't necessarily factor into this playoff series because they're going up against the 6th seed in the East and one of the younger teams that are in this postseason. However, it's something to at least factor in of going, it's not like this is, with all due respect to the Knicks, it's not like they've shown themselves to be one of the elite teams in the league this year. Like this is a good basketball team that has glaring weaknesses and is very beatable, especially in a 7-game series.
Yeah, it's so odd because in a lot of ways they were a better team last year, at least a more successful team last year, and they didn't have nearly the firepower that this team had. I think maybe they assumed because Mikal Bridges was such an excellent defensive player in Phoenix that he would come in and between he and Anunoby, they would just cancel out all of the defensive issues that come with having Karl Anthony Towns and Jalen Brunson on the same court. But it just hasn't happened. OG Anunoby has lived up to his building. Mikal Bridges, he's been good offensively, but just defensively, I don't even recognize the guy anymore.
Yeah.
And maybe some of that is just not having good personnel around him. It's just that's kind of been, I think, what's kept this Knicks team from going from, being good to just, being the contender that everyone assumed they would be when they made all these deals. And, not only that, Josh Hart, who's, God love him, excellent glue guy, very good defensive player, not necessarily an all defensive type guy. He and Asar Thompson are almost mirror images schematically, because both teams are going to leave those guys open, and the coaches are going to have to figure out how to make them important offensively so that you won't get cheated off of and you won't have to play 4-on-5 on offense.
Yeah, I think Asar at least has some more shiftiness to his game and bounce that can allow him to create more opportunities. But to your point, that's kind of something we talked about last week quite a bit, is like, what does that look like for Asar, because he's been able to maneuver around that pretty well during the regular season, but it's going to be to a different degree in the postseason. But I think the biggest thing that I think, people might think is like, people might not care about as much, but I think in the big picture, the biggest benefit, regardless of what happens in this postseason for the Pistons, is if you're Trajan Langdon and his front office, this is the best possible evaluation time that you can get, because you get to see what your guys are really made of right now. Like what they can, specifically, what are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? You're getting real truth serum from other coaching staffs. Specifically, what do they think of this guy based on how they defend him, right? And I think a guy like a Cade Cunningham, I think you're pretty confident that he's going to be able to go in and handle the challenge. I think a lot of questions about him have been answered, especially with how he handled the adversity of last season and how the growth he's taken this season. But for me, it's like, Where's the Jalen Duren at? And what are those extension talks like this summer? If we do get to see a Jaden Ivey, which I'm putting at like a 10% chance, by the way, I just think there's no reason to bring him back in that type of position. But for the others, it's like Ron Holland. How ready is he for these moments? Isaiah Stewart, we know he's going to be, to me, he's like the one I have the least questions about. But you look up and down the roster, it's like, okay, what is this team actually? And where can they move around the margins to make moves? And you're going to get those answers, arguably the best possible answers, through playoff basketball and through those high pressure scenarios.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think that's something we got to look at as well, is look, what does this mean for the offseason too? I think you brought up some great points, especially about Duren. I'm really excited to see them, go square to square and toe to toe in playoff basketball, Sean, because you're right. We Trajan Langdon put this team together, to make leaps, to make jumps this season. I think that's what our expectation was in the offseason. And 44 wins and now playoff basketball. We are going to see the biggest opportunity to see what we have in house. Not that we don't know, because you're right. Guys like Isaiah Stewart, we've seen the production there. Malik Beasley, I think even here's another guy that, we don't have to evaluate much. We know what we're going to get from a production standpoint with him, but it's going to be really fun to see maybe a month from now. If the Pistons have been eliminated, what did we learn from this series as far as moving forward into next season? So you're right. As much as we want to compete now, as much as we want to win a playoff series against the Knicks, there still is that element too to look forward to, of what can we learn from this team that will dictate any tweaks that we have to make for next season.
Yeah, and to your point, Sean, one of the questions that I was constantly being asked for the last few weeks is, who do you want to see the Pistons play in the playoffs? And it was just an unanswerable question for me, because I didn't care. Like, I want this team to get stress tested.
Yep.
I want to see what Cade looks like under the bright lights, and Ron Holland and Asar Thompson, Isaiah Stewart. There's just, you can go up and down. Outside of Tobias Harris and Tim Hardaway and Malik Beasley, everyone else is kind of a question mark. But this is the thing that you can't get when you have lottery seasons. Like,
Yep.
you don't know how these players are going to perform in the playoffs until you actually get them into the playoffs. This team spent all of this season learning how to be a good regular season team. But the playoffs are a very different animal, and they're about to get an education on whether they win or lose. How do you graduate from being a good regular season team to a good playoff team?
Yep.
Regardless of who their opponent was, I just wanted to see that, even if they lost. So I'm with you guys. This is the most exciting part for me, because I can go into this with no expectations. This is like a learning experience, like a really cool learning experience for this whole roster.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the exciting thing, is you get to see exactly where this team is going to be, and you're going to get a lot of answers to some of the questions, that you've had in the past. And I think, the biggest thing is you're going to be able to see your franchise, like who you think is going to be your, cornerstone potential superstar in a Cade Cunningham, get to play in those bright lights. And it's not like, by the way, this is going to be like the NBA TV relegated series in the first round. Like, they're playing the New York Knicks. This is going to be one of the premier first round series from a scheduling standpoint, from a production standpoint. The Pistons are going to be in the bright lights, in front row, as far as, the public eyes. So it's going to be interesting just to see how they handle it all as a whole. But, I think regardless of all that, I still think a lot of credit deserves to be given to, a JB Bickerstaff and his coaching staff, and, like Trajan Langdon and his front office. But we're going to learn a lot about them as well, with how they handle not only the coming month, but the coming months, because as they've even admitted, this has been a lot more accelerated than their original vision and plan was. And do you pivot, and do you make radical decisions because of that? Or do you stick closer to what your original plan was? Because that could potentially, as Trajan can see pretty well, based off of his former place of employment, that could potentially cost you your job.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, and I Sean, with this roster that we have, at least what I would be leaning towards is, again, tweaking, right? Tweaking, not radically changing. So, I mean, yeah, you're right. There's a lot to watch for the playoffs, but, at least where my head is at from where the league has gone with other teams making decisions when they've overperformed in the regular season. I personally think mistakes get made pretty easily when you go that radical route.
Yeah. And this reminds me very much of, and we talked a little about this before we started. 1995-96 season, which was Grant Hill's second season, but he was the exact same age Cade is right now. They're both 24.
Mm-hmm.
And this was just a random thought by me when the season started, because I think they were 0-3 or 0-4 at the time. And I said, look, for people, it looked like things were going to go as badly as they've always gone. And I said, look, for anyone that wants something to hold on to, we had another team that was led by a superstar in the same age, a little less than 30 years ago, that, they had a lot of youth, a lot of draft picks, and they had a brand new head coach. They had new management take over that season. I think it was the same guy in both roles. That was Doug Collins, a brilliant coach. Unfortunately, not as good a general manager, but they gave him both roles, right?
Yeah.
So, that team went from 28 to 46, which was at that point, a franchise record for a single season turnaround.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not just that. The parallels to this season were insane. They had the exact same record after 10 games, exact same record after 20, exact same record at the midway point. Like all the way through the first 70 games, the 96 team and this team were almost identical. Now that team, had to run through the tape because they were fighting for home court advantage, and they fell short by one game, and they dropped from they lost to the Cavs second to last game of the season. That would have made them the 4 seed, and because they lost, they dropped all the way down to 7. That's how close it was. The difference between the 4 seed and the 7 seed that year was one game. But aside from all that, you had Grant Hill. He had 10 triple doubles. Cade had 9 triple doubles this season. Allen Houston set the team 3-point record. Malik Beasley set the team 3-point record.
That's crazy.
Yeah, just the parallels are crazy, but that's not necessarily my point here. How that story ends, of course, is because they dropped to 7. They faced Shaq, Penny, and the Orlando Magic, and they were very competitive, at least in the third game, but they did get swept. And going into that offseason, that was a very important offseason because that was still a relatively low-cost team. Doug Collins had these dreams of luring Dikembe Mutombo and Juwan Howard, who was coming off of a great season. They were both unrestricted free agents, and Doug Collins made it very clear that he wanted one of those guys, and they were willing to spend big, and he wanted to make this big leap. But the problem is the number 2, Grant's co-star in that team was already there. That was Allen Houston. He was 20-point-a-game scorer, and it was clear that he was going to become an all-star someday, along with Grant Hill. And Doug Collins kind of ignored him, and they essentially lowballed him. No one's ever said what the offer was, but it was clearly lower than what his market value was. They just assumed, because no one, young stars never left their teams during that day. It just didn't happen.
Yep.
But we were entering the 90s, and they were about to, get a very hard lesson on how things have changed. So while the Pistons were pursuing, these other guys to form, get a third star on the team, Allen Houston, they tell Allen Houston, look, if you get a better offer, we'll match it. Well, he was no under obligation to have that happen. Like, he goes to New York. The Knicks gave him a fantastic offer, and he just didn't feel the need to come back. And that's just how it went. And that was the point. People think that the Grant Hill era was, failed because Grant Hill wasn't good enough, or, whatever. The team wasn't. The Grant Hill era failed because the Pistons multiple times, management kept aggressively trying to microwave a contender around Grant Hill instead of, letting it grow. And it was at that point that that was their one chance to build a contender around Grant Hill, and that was it. Grant Hill kind of struggled to carry the team for the next 4 years and he was gone. Now, people don't think about that often because, the end of the story is he goes to Orlando, we get Ben Wallace, and boom, we have a championship foundation. But yeah, this kind of reminds me of that, where I almost hope management does nothing over the summer, or at least nothing that costs them their future. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Because it would be very easy for them to say, let's go get Kevin Durant. Let's go, get Zion Williamson. Let's get this big name star because we're already successful.
Let's go get Devin Booker.
Yeah. Well, I don't think Booker will be. I think Durant will be available. I don't know about Booker, but even so, to your point, fine. Let's say he is. I worry about them trying to make the big splash instead of just letting this young core grow and just to see how well that they can grow in the future.
I really say Booker because that's the one that Pistons Twitter, tweets about probably every 20 minutes about wanting to come back to Detroit. But to your point, Keith, I agree. We are on lock and step 100% on this with a Cade Cunningham. He just signed his rookie extension, but for all intents and purposes, you do not have many or really any assets to work with, very going forward. This is kind of almost not the opposite of the Oklahoma City situation, but certainly very, very far off from the Oklahoma City situation as far as the amount of picks that they have. Trajan's been good about accumulating second round capital, but with the way that the salary cap is, it has become so hard to acquire first round picks unless you're trading high level players. Even then, Luka Doncic only got one somehow. They got Anthony Davis, but even then, still, regardless, just shows you how hard those are to come by these days. So, if you are going to make those types of trades, you have to be absolutely sure that it either does launch you right into contention, or will keep you or will keep you in that conversation for years to come. Because if you make that move and you miss, we've seen the Pistons squander their cap space for years, right? We all know about the Charlie Villanueva, Ben Gordon signings. We all know about how they had to, waive and stretch a Josh Smith, and that put them in cap hell. The last time they had their one chance to go blow their assets, Stan Van Gundy went to save his job and went to Steve Ballmer and said, "Hey, bud, how about Blake Griffin?" So, and as fun as some of the Blake Griffin times were, and not that there were some truly awful basketball at all times during some of those years, we all know how it worked out, right? And if you want to end with a much more positive story with a Cade Cunningham in Detroit and have him be remembered in the ilks of an Isaiah Thomas or a Chauncey Billups or some of the players that have won championships, and not as a Grant Hill of, man, what could have been, you have to make sure you're doing those right things. And I do think Trajan is very measured and very cognizant of that, just at least from the, being around him and just from what we've seen thus far, he seems very, very, intentional about the decisions he makes, which the Pistons haven't always necessarily had, which is a very, very good thing.
Yeah.
So, Keith, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about this next story while I had you on the podcast. I think you might know where I'm going, but Shams reported a couple hours ago. This is as of Monday, so things could change as the week goes on. However, per Shams, Joe Dumars is currently the front runner to be the next head of basketball operations with the New Orleans Pelicans. After 11 years, he was dismissed from the Pistons after the 2014 season. He did work with the Kings for a couple of years as a special senior advisor. He was with the league as essentially the head of NBA basketball operations. A lot of those fines and suspensions that have been handed out over the last couple of years have come from Joe Dumars' desk. But now it seems like he could be indeed back after all of this time to running his own basketball franchise. I want to get both of your takes on this, of course, but Keith, as someone who, as someone who knows so much about that Bad Boys team and obviously knows a lot about the Pistons history, what's your reaction to hearing that Joe Dumars will once again be running a basketball franchise? And does it surprise you that it took 11 years for this opportunity to come across his desk?
It doesn't necessarily surprise me, just simply how bad the final 10 years of it. Like, look, his start to his tenure running the Pistons was almost perfect.
Yep.
He was just hitting on every trade. Like, his drafts were not very good outside of Tayshaun Prince and a couple select others, but in general, he microwaved a championship team out of a team that everybody thought was hopeless and it would be in a 5-year rebuild. He was back in the playoffs in 1 year, won a championship in 3 years. That it was just an awesome job. Like, if the Pistons for whatever reason had let him go then, he would have had 7 jobs by now. But the issue is, you either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. And that was kind of, if you look at the final 10 years of Joe's managerial career, I think the downfall started with Darko, blowing the number 2 pick on Darko, even though, that was, a lot of people had him as the consensus number 2. That was not out of left field pick. But just, he had a chance to, once that team was finally blown up, he blew it up himself. He could have given that another year run. He decided to start early. And look, you laid out very well all of the money that he's very badly mismanaged. He completely failed the rebuild from the going to work team. And then he managed to clear the deck with that. And then he was given a second chance by Tom Gores to do another rebuild. And it was very, very clear by the halfway through year 2 that it was a failure yet again. And so he was fired. And look, I am very happy to see him get this chance because I think he deserves another chance. But I think it took that long for, I think, people to appreciate what he did well and then forget, how just badly the Pistons were left when he was finally terminated. I think in 2014.
Yeah, I think even when you win a championship, the stigma of drafting a Darko over a Carmelo Anthony, a Chris Bosh, and a Dwayne Wade is just something that's really hard to shake off, especially when you had a lot of other draft picks subsequently that didn't necessarily go super well either. I think, with the Luka Doncic trade, the only other trade that I can even think of that comes close to what that trade was, not as far as the magnitude, but just the clear abandonment of one team's identity just in a snap, is that Chauncey Billups Allen Iverson trade. I mean, Allen Iverson is a great player. Don't get me wrong. He's a Hall of Fame talent, Hall of Fame player, but it was never going to be something in Detroit that would fit or make sense. I mean, I've said it on this pod a lot, but the going to work team went for the we're talking about practice guy, which is just a complete antithesis of what that team was about. Right. And, not that, Joe Dumars, should necessarily be fully blocked out of these opportunities because of those things, because to your point, Keith, it's it has, I think the time was needed for people to truly appreciate all of those things. And look, I'm sure he would tell you that he would go back and change a lot of those decisions himself as well. But I mean, when you do have those opportunities, and they are there's only 30 of these jobs for a reason, right? It's it can be hard to shake some of those things. But Troy, here, just what's your reaction, and what are your thoughts about potentially a New Orleans Pelicans led franchise by one Joe Dumars?
Yeah. Well, certainly he is my guy as far as era of when I was really getting into Detroit Pistons basketball. But, you had mentioned, obviously the biggest thing on his resume that isn't good is that Darko draft. You mentioned Villanueva and Ben Gordon already, but I mean, come on, guys. There, Brandon Knight, Greg Monroe. I mean, some of these other picks too, we have to talk about, I think, with those were really important drafts that we missed on. And so I guess moving forward, I think that time he had, away from at least, the GM spot and, president of basketball operations type of, positions. I think, I hope that, he realizes now too, that this is a different NBA than when he was in some of those seats and making some of those decisions. So, the big thing that I want to see because, Keith already mentioned it, really his best and only good draft was that Tayshaun Prince, 2002 pick. So, for me, Sean, I want to see him, especially in that New Orleans seat. Yeah, there's going to be some free agent stuff he has to figure out, some trade stuff that has to be figured out. But as we know, good teams are built in the draft. And that's my number one thing when I think of a Joe Dumars getting a job like that, is what is he going to do in the draft? Because I still have some bad taste in my mouth from some of those picks. So I really hope that it works out for him. I mean, he's a Pistons legend. Winning those 2 championships with us, and then actually 3, with the president of basketball operations position. And I just want him to get some good draft picks for New Orleans if it's going to work out.
But Troy, you love Jonas Jerebko. We don't got to talk about Austin Day, but you love Jonas Jerebko.
I do. But we got to all admit that second round pick, I do not think even the career Jonas Jerebko had, I don't think you expected that with the pick that he had.
The real sad irony is that it is very, very difficult to find an all-star NBA player in the second round of the draft. It's like, we've experienced this. It's hard to find productive players in the second round, let alone all-stars. Joe Dumars found 2, and he will never get credit for either one because neither of them stuck around. Mehmet Okur, who, had they not made the Rasheed Wallace deal, would have been a Piston for life, but they simply, because of the Gilbert Arenas rule, they simply could not afford to bring him back and Rasheed at the same time. They had to choose one or the other, and it was a no-brainer. Right. And Okur went on to be an all-star, which we all saw coming, but he just didn't have a choice. And then the second one was just sheer bad luck, was Chris Middleton. The Brandon Knight, Brandon Jennings deal, which wound up being the Chris Middleton deal in hindsight.
Right. That deal today got them Kyle Kuzma, if you really think about it, right? Yeah. Because Middleton, oh my gosh, Brandon Jennings or Kyle Kuzma is Brandon Jennings. That's what we learned from that.
And it's just Joe did not, of all the second round picks that he gave so much time to before he let him go. Chris Middleton was the one that he was okay with using as a throw-in in a deal for a guy that even at his peak was a very good player, but was not ever going to change the frame. All he wanted was a starting point guard, a legit starting point guard. Mm-hmm. I don't think that Milwaukee would have haggled that much over Chris Middleton, but it's for whatever reason, Joe just couldn't see it for the guy that he drafted. He couldn't see it because the guy came into the draft injured. That's why he fell as far as he did.
Yeah, but he was a hard worker too. Middleton was a hard worker when he was with us. Yeah,
but he really didn't get to play until the very end of the season. And at that point, he's out of shape. He's just getting into his legs, and then we never really got a chance to see what he could be. And then he's traded, and then he goes to Milwaukee, and immediately, it looks like a horrendous mistake in hindsight.
And Joe Dumars would have drafted Dinwiddie right in 2013 too, but traded him. I think he was with us for a good year and a half, and he's still a guy that's getting some good production in the league today too.
Yeah, Stan Van was the one that traded him.
Okay,
gotcha. Good, dirty, rotten Stan. No, I'm kidding. But it was with Joe. The thing that's interesting is with New Orleans. Drafting hasn't really been their issue, at all, actually. Like, they've had some really good players. Now, granted, some of their issues have been choosing which ones to keep and which ones to throw into a DeJounte Murray trade. Cough, cough, Dyson Daniels, cough, cough. And has been, actually keeping one of their premier guys on the court in a Zion Williamson. So the thing that's going to be interesting to see is, what does Joe Dumars do with what's currently there? Does he keep a Zion and continue to try to build around that? Because the good news for him is he at least has some young players to work with. So it's not like he necessarily has to come in and be this amazing drafter from day one. He's at least allowed to maybe make a little bit of some mistake, which we know is going to happen at least a little bit. We love you, Joe, but we know it's going to happen at some point.
Yeah, I almost think the Pelicans would be insane if they don't trade Zion.
Yeah,
This is the first time he's ended. I know they put him on the injured list to end the season, but that's a fake. Everybody knows teams do that with their stars when they're going into the lottery. This was the best shape when he returned, at least, that he was by far the best shape he's ever been, including college.
Yep.
A very productive player. They need to strike, and I think that's what will happen. I think they'll trade Zion for something to somebody who will take a chance on him. The entire reason the Pelicans failed wasn't because they didn't have good players. It's because they didn't have good players that would, play in games. All their players got hurt. Ingram, Zion. You can go on down their whole freaking team. Even when they got
Lonzo Ball,
DeJounte Murray.
Yeah.
Their whole team kept getting injured every year, and I think that's going to be their emphasis going forward, is to move on from high-priced talent that doesn't suit up for games. And I hope the Pistons aren't the team that takes the chance on Zion.
Do you have any predictions, Keith, of what team would take a chance on Zion?
I mean, the Suns would love to have him, I'm sure, but I don't think they have the ability to trade for him. I mean, stranger things have happened. Like, they might. That's a team that's just like, they have an owner that says, "Oh, look at that cool shiny toy in the window. I want that. Go get that for me." And then the GM just makes it happen, no matter how many future draft picks they have to give up, right? So they're always a wild card. But I don't know. I'd have to look over just to see which team is desperate enough to really want to take a chance. And like Orlando might be one, Atlanta might be another one. Like which fringe playoff team that's been there for a while is desperate to just roll the dice and take the risk.
Yeah, could Chicago potentially be a team that says let's screw it, let's get frisky? Although they've never been very much of a risk-taking franchise.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's that's the interesting thing, is what does a market for him even look like, and what would teams even be willing to give up for a Zion Williamson? And I think the one thing, at least what you're getting in New Orleans is with Joe Dumars is you're getting an unequivocal champion. You're getting a guy who who knows what winning basketball looks like and knows what the standard looks like. I think as far as we've seen him have to adapt, as to the league before, we've seen him also have a hard time adapting to the league in the past. But I think one thing, at least with like this head of NBA, basketball ops job, is he's been so intrinsically involved in the league office and seeing where the league is developed and evolved. And I think with that time that he's had away and to be in different roles and have that different perspective, I think there is a chance he could do a good job. It's just New Orleans has probably been one of the most cursed franchises in the league with just some of the stuff that has happened to them. And they've already had 2 number 1 overall pick prospects in Anthony Davis and Zion, 2 guys who are probably some of the most hyped prospects coming out of college too over the last 20 years. And for neither of them to really pan out is not great luck. So at least they're getting like a known commodity of they're getting a proven winner in whatever facet he's been in Joe Dumars. Yeah. So at the very least, just as someone who likes Joe Dumars a lot, I'm just glad to see him back, getting this opportunity again.
Yeah. If I can just add one thing real quick.
Of course.
Something you said is look, when Joe Dumars originally took over the Pistons, he just didn't step into the job and run it like he knew what he was doing. He actually, if you recall, he actually had an interim period where he let the current GM, I think it was Rick Sund at the time, run the team for 1 year while he had no responsibility. He just sat and learned for 1 year. And after 1 year, and that's the cool thing with Dumars, is he's always been a learner, a guy that's been willing to take a step back and learn and improve himself. Now, he's had 10 years, like you said, he's been in the league office. I think his management style will change this time around. It's just a question on how much, because I guarantee you he's picked up some things working in the league office and then working with the Sacramento Kings. I think he's, for whatever the modern NBA is, which maybe he wasn't prepared for at the end of his time in Detroit, I think he feels like he's better prepared now to handle that job.
Yeah, most definitely. And I mean, at the very least with the Kings, he's learned what not to do. So he's got that going for him. Sorry, I just had to. But before we go, Troy, Keith, I would like to ask you both, outside of the Pistons Knicks series, what other series in the playoffs intrigue you, and like what storylines are you kind of looking? I'll give you guys kind of a second to think, and I'll kind of give some of my answers. Lakers Minnesota is going to obviously be an incredible series. I think that's one that everyone looks at. But as far as like a storyline for this playoffs, to me, I think we're going to learn how legitimate this Oklahoma City Thunder team really is. They almost won 70 games, and I think a lot of people have minimized and disrespected what this team has accomplished this season. They just had one of the most dominant single season performances in that we've seen from a regular season team, especially in the Western Conference. And for them to have all these doubters and no one, for whatever reason, not a lot of people believe that they can actually win a championship or make it to the finals, especially with an SGA caliber player and all the youth and just how awesome defensively this team has been. I've been a big proponent and a champion of the Thunder, so to speak, of what they can do. I think this playoff run is going to teach us a lot of how legitimate that team really is. And if they need to use their treasure trove of picks to potentially make a move this summer, because if they don't go and make that type of run, I mean, we talk about potential, Giannis destinations. If that blows up in Milwaukee, I could see Oklahoma City with all those picks being a team that could go and make that happen. So, Troy, what about you? What's some series that intrigue you, and what are you watching going into this postseason?
Yeah, for me, I think the series that you mentioned at the very beginning, Lakers and Timberwolves. I think we're going to learn a lot about both of those teams too. With certainly both having players that are in the spotlight with a Luka Doncic and an Anthony Edwards. I think just that matchup in general, that the fact that one of those teams have to go out in the first round, that's going to be really interesting. Clippers and Nuggets, I think we were texting about that of, wow, one of those teams is going to go out first too. If it's the Clippers, this will be another year getting out in the first round, another year where they're trying to put pieces together. Yes, they've been looking good this year. Even guys like Norman Powell have been great role players for them, but also the Denver Nuggets. If somehow the Clippers do find it and get it together, that means the Nuggets are going to get out in the first round. Another failed year with Jokic, the second year after, they were able to win the championship in 2023. So for me, those two are going to be really big. I'll be honest, I live here in Indianapolis, so Pacers and Bucks, man, we're going to learn a lot about both of those teams and where they are at with that. Another one where it's just a shame that either, Tyrese Halliburton, Miles Turner, those guys, Pascal Siakam, the season that he's had, the All-Star season that he's had, the fact that either he has to get out in the first round or the Bucks again for the third year in the row have to get out in the first round. For me, with these first round series, the league is just so deep that there's going to be teams where we're going to be shaking our head at and say, man, I thought they had it together. Man, we saw them have great stretches in the regular season, but they couldn't get it done in a 7-game series. So for me, those 3 series are going to be certainly on my to watch list. But yeah, how about you, Keith?
All right. So this is kind of a difficult question because 50% of the first round series aren't set yet. So we don't know what the 1-8s or the 2-7s in either conference are going to be.
Yeah, but now, those series are but
not always
good ones though. We could have
not always. Sometimes they've been compelling, but look, I agree with you, Sean. I think Oklahoma City from an offseason standpoint is the most, compelling thing because if they don't win, because they've been the most dominant team in the league by a good margin. The Cavs were with them, for a little while until they weren't. And it's kind of just been OKC by themselves, just running away from everybody. So if they don't get out of the Western Conference, I think you will finally see them pull the trigger, on that treasure trove of assets they've been sitting on for the better part of a decade. And yeah, it'll be very interesting to see what they could possibly get with that because, the possibilities are endless for them. But for right now, from my own personal standpoint, because I think the Pistons Knicks of these 4 series, I think would be the most, at least before we start, is going to be the most fascinating one that everyone wants to look at because I think that's the one that people are picking the upset. But, the team that I'm looking at the most from my personal standpoint is the Houston Rockets because the Houston Rockets to me they're the 1 year ahead version of where the Pistons really are. The Pistons are kind of where the Rockets were a year ago. Even though the Rockets barely missed the playoffs, they didn't make it. They were kind of on that. That's when you really started to notice them moving up when they got those veterans. This year, the Pistons got their veterans, and their young players are making that leap finally. So when I'm watching Houston, I don't know whoever they play, and I think they are the one team in the West that poses the greatest threat to the Thunder just because of matchups. But regardless, if and when the Pistons ever do get eliminated, whenever that is, I'm going to be watching the Rockets from that point on, because to me, it's almost like this is, if the Pistons keep it together another year, this is what they could possibly be, and this is how far they could possibly go. And that'll be my metric going into next season for what I expect from the Pistons.
Well, and what a freaking prize for the Rockets for getting the second seed and putting in all this work, that you're more than likely going to have to face the Golden State Warriors in the first round with Steph Curry, Jimmy Butler. Like, that is absolutely drawing the short straw there, without a doubt. And how could I forget, as far as most intriguing postseason matchups, we're finally getting another Bulls Heat playing game, guys. It's happening again. We're running it back. Let's go.
Oh,
man. I'll tell you this: the Bulls are way more dangerous than they have been the last few years.
I agree.
Like, if you look at how they've played since they've traded DeMar DeRozan, which is weird because I don't think he's like a guy you get better from trading. But when they've gone with their youth movement plus Vucevic, who for some reason is still there, they have played lights out basketball. Which you couldn't imagine when the Pistons just humiliated them right before the All-Star break and back to that game. They looked like they were ready to lose the rest of the season, and instead they've gone the other way with it. And I think I watched several of their games, and I think they're actually, pretty tough, pretty exciting. I am weirdly on board with the Chicago Bulls current core, and I never thought I'd be able to say that. So I'll be disappointed if they don't beat Miami, because I would very much like to see them in the playoffs. I don't know that they can, but I hope they at least beat Miami and give them a shot in the second game.
I agree with that. I mean, I think Troy, like we've been ragging on the Bulls on this pod for a long time too, but it's like the difference with this team is they at least have a ramp, like a rampway. Like there's at least like a trajectory that they can like go upon. Like they're just as good at least as some of the Bulls teams of years past, except this team has a really young and intriguing Josh Giddey, a really young and intriguing Kobe White, like Matas Buzelis who's a rookie who has shown some flashes of being pretty awesome himself. And so, I will say this: as much hard time as people give Chicago, like they're first in attendance pretty much all the time. They're up there in merchandise sales. The league is objectively in a much better place when the Bulls are relevant. So if this team can actually get things together, I mean, that could be pretty fun. So I agree with Keith there 100%. But Keith, this was so fun, man. Seriously, thank you so much for coming on. I would love to do this at least one more time in the playoffs, or even perhaps after the Pistons get eliminated, we can, start and talking about, like evaluation, all those things. But legitimately, man, you are one of the best basketball minds I've met, and just a really great guy. Always really enjoy our interactions, and also just a really great follow on whatever social media platform you're at. It's Charlatan28 on X.
Charlatan.
I am Charlatan. I am an absolute freaking scrub. I apologize.
No, you're okay. I had to learn the term when I moved here too.
All right, is that the same thing on Blue Sky as well? Charlatan.
Blue Sky. It's at Bad Boys Beyond, one word.
Okay, that's right. And speaking of, you also have the Bad Boys Beyond podcast that you did with Mike Payton, who is also a really good Pistons source, Lions beat writer primarily, but also a really good podcast where you guys talk all things Pistons history, dive back in a lot of things. I've had some really awesome interviews and an absolutely incredible podcast to listen to. Check that out on YouTube. Hope to see it come back potentially someday, but obviously know that life has its trials and things like that as well. But seriously, Keith, thanks so much for coming on, man.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is a lot of fun. It's been a minute since I've been on the mic talking Pistons, and I've always enjoyed it.
Yeah, Absolutely. And always enjoy having you on. And Troy, always love having you here as well. And thank you to those who listen at home and join us here from Half Court. Be sure you're subscribed. You're not missing any of the content here this postseason and this off season, as we have a lot of Pistons and NBA basketball to discuss. But that's going to be it for today, folks. Thank you for listening. We'll catch you guys next time from Half Court.